There's a voice that has narrated more than 50 years of American cinema. A sound so deep, so unhurried, and so incredibly resonant that the moment it reaches you, something in your chest naturally goes still. With a single, gravelly whisper and the most iconic mustache in the history of film, Sam Elliott redefined what it meant to be a man on screen. He is the ultimate, undisputed symbol of the American West. But there's a heavy, heartbreaking truth hiding behind the legendary drawl, a reality the cameras never fully captured. At 81 years old, behind the Academy Award nominations and the billions in box office, stands a man shaped by a tragic wound that never, ever closed. A son whose strict, unyielding father died suddenly before witnessing a single triumph, leaving Sam to spend a lifetime trying to prove his worth to a ghost. A struggling actor who endured 20 brutal, agonizing years of rejection in Hollywood's wilderness, treated as completely invisible, and a proud patriarch who recently faced a devastating public controversy that threatened to erase everything he had spent half a century building. How does a man survive 20 years of constant, humiliating rejection without completely breaking? What is the secret, agonizing cause of carrying the heavy armor of the ultimate cowboy for an entire lifetime? And what happens when a legend looks back at his life, realizing his greatest tragedy was the silence he could never fill? Before we answer these questions, we must go back to the beginning. To understand the legend at 81, you must first know the invisible boy who was desperately trying to make his father proud. The practical father, the unseen son, and the tragic wound. There's a manufactured illusion in Hollywood regarding the men who play our greatest heroes. We are conditioned to believe that they arrive in this world already forged in steel, brimming with unbreakable confidence, perfectly designed to conquer the silver screen. We look at the rugged, unmovable presence of a man like Sam Elliott, and we assume he was simply born a legend. But legends are rarely born in the sunlight. They're usually forged in the dark, hammered into existence by pressure, by silence, and most profoundly, by the unbearable weight of the things that are withheld from them. Some men are shaped by the abundant love they are given. Sam Elliott was entirely shaped by the approval he was denied. Born on August 9, 1944, in Sacramento, California, Samuel Pack Elliott arrived in a world defined by straight lines, hard labor, and post-war American practicality. When Sam was 13 years old, the family relocated to Portland, Oregon. It was a city of rain, of towering pine trees, and of deep, conservative reservations. But the true, defining geography of Sam's early life was not the landscape of the Pacific Northwest. It was a rigid, uncompromising, emotional landscape of his own home. His father, Henry Nelson Elliott, was a man of the earth. He worked for the Department of the Interior as a predator control specialist. Henry was a product of the Great Depression, practical, deeply purposeful, and built from the kind of no-nonsense, callous fabric that measured a man's worth entirely by the physical sweat on his brow and the stability of his paycheck. His mother, Glenn, was warmer, a physical training instructor who tried to hold the household together with a steady, quiet affection. But in the Elliott home, the silence that mattered most was a silence that existed between a father and a son. Henry Elliott was not a cruel man. He was not absent in the physical sense. He showed up for meals, he provided discipline, and he enforced a strict, unwavering structure that defined his generation's idea of fatherhood. But warmth was simply not a part of his vocabulary. Emotional validation was a currency he refused to spend. For young Sam, a boy who was already restless, lanky, awkward, and drawn to an artistic world his father could not even begin to comprehend, that emotional distance carved a deep, aching void in his chest. He desperately wanted to be seen. He wanted his father to look at him with pride. When Sam discovered acting, it was not merely a hobby. When he stood on a stage in high school and college, reciting lines, he experienced a profound, almost intoxicating revelation. Acting was the only place where the quiet, overlooked boy from Portland could command a room. It was the only place where his deep, developing voice forced people to stop and listen. But when Sam finally summoned the courage to tell his father that he intended to pursue acting, as a professional career. The confrontation was utterly devastating. There were no screaming matches. There were no vilely thrown objects. It was worse than that. It was the absolute crushing weight of a father's quiet, immovable disappointment. Henry looked at his son, a son who was declaring his intention to join the chaotic, frivolous, and financially unstable circus of Hollywood, and told him he was making a colossal, humiliating mistake. According to those who knew the family, Henry delivered a line that would echo in the darkest corners of Sam's mind for the rest of his life. He told his son that he didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of ever making it in the movie business. Imagine the sheer, suffocating psychological agony of that moment. The one man on earth whose approval you crave more than oxygen looks you directly in the eye and tells you that your greatest dream is completely worthless, that you are destined to fail. Sam was crushed. For a brief period, he tried to conform. He attended the University of Oregon as an English and psychology major. He transferred to Clark College in Vancouver, Washington. He worked grueling, blue-collar jobs in construction, pouring concrete, trying to mold himself into practical, hard-working labor his father demanded him to be. He tried to kill the dream. But true callings cannot be suffocated under wet concrete. In 1965, driven by an agonizing, burning desperation to prove that his father was wrong, Sam made the definitive, terrifying decision of his life. He packed his bags, left the rainy skies of the Pacific Northwest behind, and drove to Los Angeles. He arrived in Hollywood completely alone. He had no connections, no money, and no safety net. He arrived with nothing but a staggering, mountainous chip on his shoulder and a desperate need to show Henry Elliott that his son was not a failure. Sam threw himself into the relentless, exhausting grind of the industry. He took acting classes. He worked construction jobs in Los Angeles to pay the rent, and he attended every audition he could find. He was preparing to invite his father to a premiere, to hand him a newspaper clipping, to force the old man to finally, inevitably say, "I was wrong. I am proud of you." But destiny is a cruel, unforgiving director, and it was preparing to deliver the most catastrophic, permanently scarring blow of Sam Elliott's entire existence. In March of 1966, when Sam was just 21 years old, struggling to find his footing in a massive, indifferent city, the telephone rang. The voice on the other end of the line delivered a sentence that completely shattered the foundation of his universe. His father, Henry Elliott, had suffered a massive, sudden heart attack. Henry was dead at the age of 54. To say that this was a tragedy for Sam Elliott is an incredibly profound understatement. It was a psychological apocalypse. When a parent passes away, the grief is always unbearable. But when a parent passes away while you are locked in an unresolved, bitter conflict over your own worth, when they die before you have a chance to prove them wrong, the grief is fundamentally poisoned by a permanent, inescapable sense of failure. The ultimate, agonizing tragedy of Sam Elliott's life was cemented in that exact moment. The man whose approval he had chased across the span of his entire childhood, the father whose stern, disappointed gaze had haunted his every decision, was suddenly, permanently gone. Henry Elliott never saw his son appear on a television screen. He never saw his son ride a horse in a major motion picture. He died completely, absolutely convinced that his son was throwing his life away on a foolish, pathetic delusion. The door was permanently locked, and Sam would never, ever get the chance to change his father's mind. He died thinking I was a bum. Sam would later reflect, the raw, bleeding pain of that reality still evident in his voice decades later. He died before he ever saw me do anything. That was the hardest thing. I never got to show him. Listen to the absolute, crushing heartbreak in those words. For the older audiences watching this, especially the men who have spent their entire lives secretly carrying the heavy, unresolved baggage of a complicated relationship with their own fathers, this is a moment of profound, tear-inducing empathy. We look at the ultimate Hollywood tough guy, and suddenly we realize that beneath the iconic mustache and the deep, commanding voice, there is just a 21-year-old boy, kneeling in the dark, weeping for a father who left too soon. Sam Elliott was completely devastated. He could have easily surrendered. He could have packed his bags, moved back to Oregon, and lived a quiet, practical life in the shadows, letting his father's cruel prophecy become a reality. But trauma has a strange, terrifying way of fueling the human spirit. The sudden death of his father did not break Sam's ambition. It weaponized it. The grief mutated into an unstoppable, ferocious obsession. He was no longer just acting for a paycheck. He was acting to vindicate his own existence. He was acting to shout into the void, hoping that somehow, someway, the ghost of Henry Elliott would hear him. He wiped his tears, set his jaw, and marched back into the glittering, superficial meat grinder of Hollywood. But the boy who had just lost his father was completely unprepared for the terrifying, 20-year nightmare that the industry had waiting for him. The brutal wilderness was about to consume his youth, and the city of illusions was about to reject him over and over again for being exactly what he was. The wilderness years and the curse of being real. There's a profound, incredibly dangerous psychological test that the universe administers to those who dare to chase an impossible dream. The test is not a sudden, violent explosion. It is not a dramatic, fiery crash that puts an immediate end to your misery. The test is time. It is a slow, agonizing, invisible dripping of clock, eroding your confidence day by day, month by month, year after year. For Sam Elliott, the brutal test of time began the exact moment the earth settled over his father's grave in 1966. He had arrived in Los Angeles carrying a heavy, bleeding wound in his chest. He was a 21-year-old boy operating on pure, unadulterated grief and a desperate need to vindicate his existence. But Hollywood is a city built entirely on the glittering, superficial architecture of illusion. It is a machine that manufactures pretty boys, chameleons, and polished commodities designed to appeal to the lowest common denominator. Hollywood did not know what to do with a man who was already carved out of solid, immovable rock. As the late 1960s transitioned into the deeply cynical, countercultural explosion of the 1970s, the cinematic landscape was dominated by rebellious hippies, neurotic anti-heroes, and slick, fast-talking leading men. Sam Elliott was none of these things. He was fundamentally, undeniably an anachronism. He looked like a man who had simply stepped out of a 19th century photograph. He possessed a thick, unruly mustache that anchored a face meant for the sun-baked plains, not the neon lights of the Sunset Strip. And then there was the voice. It was a deep, gravelly, remarkably unhurried baritone drawl that seemed to vibrate directly from the tectonic plates of the earth. When Sam walked into audition rooms, the studio executives in their tailored suits did not see a future legend. They saw a problem. They looked at the tall, imposing kid from Oregon and subjected him to the incredibly degrading, clinical dissection that destroys the souls of most young actors. They told him his look was too specific, too outdated. They told him he was entirely too slow. They explicitly instructed him to shave his trademark mustache, to drop the deep, southern-sounding drawl, and to enroll in extensive vocal lessons to speed up his delivery and sound more contemporary. They wanted him to sand off all of his rough edges. They wanted him to become plastic, reflecting on those early, humiliating demands to completely erase his own identity. Sam later delivered a quote that perfectly encapsulates the absolute, unyielding iron of his character. I had people tell me I needed to get voice and diction lessons. They said, "You've got to learn how to talk faster." I just looked at them and thought, no, I don't. I was never going to change the way I spoke. I was never going to change who I was just to fit into their mold. I was never going to change who I was. Listen to the breathtaking, quiet defiance in those words. For the audiences watching at home, especially those who have spent decades navigating the corporate world, constantly pressured to compromise their values, to laugh at the boss's terrible jokes, or to shave away their own authenticity just to keep a job. Sam's refusal is a moment of pure, profound triumph. He chose the wilderness over the golden cage. He honored the strict, practical, no-nonsense spirit of his late father by refusing to become a fake, manufactured Hollywood puppet. But authenticity is an incredibly expensive luxury, and Sam paid for it with 20 years of profound, almost suffocating obscurity. He became a working actor, which is a polite industry term for a ghost. In 1969, he managed to secure a microscopic, uncredited role in one of the greatest cinematic masterpieces of the era, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Imagine the agonizing, psychological irony of that exact moment. Sam was literally standing in the very same room as Paul Newman and Robert Redford, the absolute, untouchable gods of the silver screen. He was close enough to feel the heat of the cinematic fire, but he was entirely relegated to the freezing shadows. He played card player number 2. He was a background prop, a blurry face in the periphery of greatness. He watched the legends deliver their iconic lines, fully aware that he possessed the same depth, the same gravity, but knowing that the camera was specifically instructed to look right past him. There's an incredibly beautiful, poetic twist of fate hidden within the shadows of that specific movie set in 1969. The leading lady of that film was the gorgeous, Oscar-nominated superstar Katharine Ross. Sam was so insignificant on the call sheet, so deeply entrenched in the background, that he did not even dare to approach her or speak to her. She was royalty. He was a peasant. It would take nearly a decade for the universe to correct that distance, but the seeds of his ultimate salvation were quietly planted in the dust of that very set. Throughout the 1970s, the purgatory of episodic television became Sam's permanent residence. He became a hired gun for the great procedural landscape of American primetime. He appeared in Gunsmoke, Lancer, Mission, Impossible, and Hawaii Five-0. It was a grueling, unglamorous existence. Week after week, year after year, he would put on a costume, walk onto a set, deliver a handful of lines, and then either be killed off by the hero or silently ride away before the commercial break. He was making a living, but he was not making a mark. He was a man trapped in the margins of his own life. The boy who had driven to Los Angeles to prove his dead father wrong was now entering his 30s, and the world still did not know his name. The psychological toll of being almost is far more destructive than total failure. When you fail completely, you can pack your bags, change careers, and mourn the dream. But when you're almost there, when you are constantly given just enough crumbs to survive, just enough minor roles to pay the rent, you are kept in a perpetual, agonizing state of suspended animation. There was a brief, flickering glimmer of false hope in 1976 when Sam was cast in the leading role of the modest, critically appreciated drama lifeguard. He played an aging man who realizes his youth is fading, confronting the quiet panic of a life that has not materialized the way he had planned. The role was almost unbearably close to his own reality. He delivered a performance of stunning, quiet melancholy, proving to any executive willing to pay attention that he was absolutely capable of carrying an entire motion picture on his broad shoulders. But Hollywood is a notoriously blind machine. Lifeguard did not propel him into superstardom. It did not result in massive, multi-million-dollar studio offers. The executives patted him on the back, complimented his work, and then unceremoniously sent him right back out into the freezing wilderness of supporting television roles. It was a grueling, unglamorous existence. Week after week, year after year, he would put on a costume, walk onto a set, deliver a handful of lines, and then either be killed off by the hero or silently ride away before the commercial break. He was making a living, but he was not making a mark. He was a man trapped in the margins of his own life. The boy who had driven to Los Angeles to prove his dead father wrong was now entering his 30s, and the world still did not know his name. The psychological toll of being almost is far more destructive than total failure. When you fail completely, you can pack your bags, change careers, and mourn the dream. But when you're almost there, when you are constantly given just enough crumbs to survive, just enough minor roles to pay the rent, you are kept in a perpetual, agonizing state of suspended animation. There was a brief, flickering glimmer of false hope in 1976 when Sam was cast in the leading role of the modest, critically appreciated drama lifeguard. He played an aging man who realizes his youth is fading, confronting the quiet panic of life that has not materialized the way he had planned. The role was almost unbearably close to his own reality. He delivered a performance of stunning, quiet melancholy, proving to any executive willing to pay attention that he was absolutely capable of carrying an entire motion picture on his broad shoulders. But Hollywood is a notoriously blind machine. Lifeguard did not propel him into superstardom. It did not result in massive, multi-million-dollar studio offers. The executives patted him on the back, complimented his work, and then unceremoniously sent him right back out into the freezing wilderness of supporting television roles. As the 1970s drew to a close, Sam Elliott was approaching his 40th birthday. In an industry that brutally discards anyone who hasn't reached the summit by their mid-30s, Sam was mathematically, statistically finished. The ghost of his father, Henry, seemed to be echoing louder than ever in the quiet, empty rooms of his Los Angeles apartment. You don't have a snowball's chance in hell. Most men would have finally surrendered. Most men would have shaved a mustache, taken the voice lessons, and begged the studio executives for a second chance to play the plastic, conventional roles they originally demanded. They would have sold their soul for a taste of the spotlight. But Sam Elliott was carved from a different, infinitely older kind of granite. He refused to bend. He refused to break. He accepted the long, brutal winter of his career with the quiet, stoic dignity of a man who knows that his time has simply not yet come. He did not know it as he stared out into the vast, lonely horizon of the late 1970s, but the universe was finally preparing to reward his impossible, agonizing patience. The reward was not going to be a blockbuster movie script, nor was it going to be a massive studio contract. The universe was going to reward the lonely, unseen cowboy with a miracle that Hollywood money could never, ever buy. The woman from the shadows of 1969 was about to step back into the frame, and the man who had spent 20 years entirely invisible to the world was about to be seen, recognized, and profoundly loved by the very queen of the industry. The reversal of romance, the queen, and the anchor of Malibu. There is a highly predictable, incredibly cynical formula to romantic relationships in Hollywood, in an industry built entirely on the fragile, shifting sands of public approval. Marriages are frequently treated as strategic alliances. Two massive, glittering stars collide on a red carpet. The press orchestrates a deafening frenzy, and within a few short years, the incredibly expensive, highly publicized union dissolves in a spectacular crash of egos. But true, enduring love does not survive on a red carpet. It survives in the quiet, unglamorous spaces between the flashbulbs. And the love story of Sam Elliott and Katharine Ross completely, utterly defies every single cynical rule the entertainment industry has ever written. To understand the sheer, breathtaking magnitude of their collision, we must first look at the vast, seemingly unbridgeable chasm that separated them in the 1970s. By the late 1970s, Katharine Ross was not just an actress. She was absolute, undeniable Hollywood royalty. She had captured the heart of the entire globe in The Graduate, 1967, earning an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress at just 27 years old. She followed it up with the cinematic masterpiece Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969, and the chilling thriller The Stepford Wives, 1975. She was universally adored, remarkably beautiful, and possessed a quiet, intelligent grace that made her one of the most sought-after leading ladies in the world. Sam Elliott, as we have already witnessed, was a ghost. He was a man approaching his mid-30s, still haunting the peripheries of episodic television, still carrying the agonizing, unhealed wound of his father's disapproval, and still refusing to shave his mustache or alter his deep, unhurried drawl to appease the studio executives. On the ruthless hierarchical ladder of Hollywood society, Katharine was standing at the absolute sun-drenched summit. Sam was still miles below, lost in the freezing, invisible shadows of the valley. Remember that in 1969, they were technically on the exact same movie set for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But Sam, relegated to playing a background extra with no lines, did not even dare to walk across the room to speak to the leading lady. He knew his place. He possessed the quiet, old-school humility of a working-class man who refuses to impose himself upon a queen. But the universe, operating with its incredibly patient, mysterious sense of timing, was simply waiting for the boy to become a man. In 1978, the universe finally decided that the wait was over. Both Sam and Katharine were cast in a gothic, British horror film called The Legacy, shooting on location in the damp, atmospheric countryside of England. The film itself is largely forgotten by the annals of cinematic history. It was not a box office phenomenon, nor was it a critical darling. But the movie entirely fulfilled its ultimate cosmic purpose. It put the struggling cowboy and the Hollywood queen in the exact same room, 9 years after their first silent encounter. This time, Sam was not a background extra. He was a leading cast member. And this time, he walked across the room. When Katharine Ross looked at the tall, imposing actor with the gravelly voice and the unmistakable, rugged presence of the American West, she did not see a struggling, unknown commodity. She saw something incredibly rare, something that was almost entirely extinct in the superficial, hyper-anxious world of 1970s Hollywood. She saw a man who was absolutely, immovably anchored to the earth. Katharine had spent a decade surrounded by the most famous, powerful, and wealthy leading men on the planet. She knew the hollow, fragile egos of the Hollywood elite. She knew how quickly they folded under pressure. But when she looked at Sam, she immediately recognized that this man was built from a completely different kind of granite. He did not fawn over her fame. He did not treat her like a mythological icon. He treated her with the steady, respectful, and incredibly grounding authenticity of a man who knows exactly who he is. We just had a common sensibility, Sam would later reflect, describing the quiet, profound nature of their connection with the plain, unadorned language he always uses for things he considers sacred. We were both doing a film in London, and we just started seeing each other. She's the love of my life. That's really all there is to it. She's the love of my life. That's really all there is to it. Listen to the breathtaking simplicity of that statement. For the audiences watching at home, especially those who survived the chaotic, exhausting complexities of modern dating, or those who have spent decades married to the same person, that quote is an absolute, undeniable masterclass in true romance. There is no manufactured drama. There is no Hollywood spin. There is only a man making a declarative, unshakable statement of fact. They returned to California not as a temporary on-set fling, but as a deeply bonded partnership. Imagine the immense, profound psychological healing that this relationship provided for Sam Elliott. For his entire adult life, he had been carrying the heavy, bleeding curse of his father's final judgment. You don't have a snowball's chance in hell. He had endured a decade of executives telling him he wasn't good enough, he wasn't fast enough, and his face was entirely wrong for the camera. And yet, the very queen of the industry, a woman who could have chosen any billionaire, any director, or any A-list superstar in the world, looked at the struggling, stubborn cowboy and she chose him. She saw his absolute, undeniable worth long before the rest of the world was forced to acknowledge it. Her love was the ultimate, irrefutable vindication. It did not magically erase the ghost of his father, but it provided an impenetrable, golden shield around Sam's heart. With Katharine by his side, the rejections of the casting directors simply no longer mattered. He had found his sanctuary. In 1984, after several quiet, deeply private years together, Sam Elliott and Katharine Ross were officially married. They did not sell their wedding photos to a tabloid magazine. They did not invite 500 celebrities to a massive, ostentatious gala. They married quietly, beautifully, making a vow that they have honored with an absolute, ironclad fidelity for over 40 years. Later that exact same year, they welcomed their only child, a daughter named Cleo Rose Elliott. For Sam, the birth of his daughter was a profound, deeply emotional milestone. The man who had spent his youth terrified of his father's strict, unyielding disappointment was suddenly handed the opportunity to rewrite the generational script. He became a fiercely protective, incredibly tender, and remarkably present father. He and Katharine made a deliberate, incredibly countercultural decision. They refused to raise their daughter in the toxic, flashbulb-heavy environment of Beverly Hills. Instead, they built a quiet, secluded fortress of a home in Malibu, California. They surrounded themselves with the ocean breeze, far away from the desperate, exhausting machinery of the entertainment industry. They treated acting not as an identity to be worshipped, but simply as a blue-collar job they commuted to, leaving the Hollywood egos at the door before they walked back into their living room. The struggling actor had finally built an unbreakable empire, but it was not an empire of box office receipts. It was an empire of love. He was finally at peace. He was anchored, and in the magnificent, unpredictable, and often ironic mathematics of the universe. It is exactly when a man finally stops desperately chasing the approval of the world that the world suddenly turns around and realizes what has been missing. As Sam Elliott approached his 40th birthday, transitioning into the very age bracket where Hollywood typically begins to discard its actors, a tectonic shift was quietly occurring in the cultural landscape of America. The audience was growing exhausted by the slick, synthetic, and deeply cynical heroes of the 1980s. The culture was developing a profound, aching hunger for genuine, old-school, unapologetic masculinity. They were looking for a man who looked like he belonged on a horse, a man who didn't need to shout to command a room. The industry that had spent 20 years ignoring Sam Elliott was about to discover that the rock they had discarded in the 1960s had slowly, quietly become a magnificent, irreplaceable diamond. The wilderness was officially over. The door to immortality was about to swing wide open, and the 45-year-old cowboy was finally preparing to step through it, bringing a storm of raw, unadulterated American gravel right along with him. The breakthrough, the blueprint, and the dawn of the Titan. There is a frantic, deeply ingrained anxiety in American culture that dictates success must be achieved in the blinding sunlight of our youth. We are taught that if we do not reach the summit by the time we are 30, the mountain is permanently closed. Hollywood, more than any other industry on earth, aggressively enforces this cruel ticking clock, worshiping the unblemished faces of 20-something prodigies while rapidly discarding anyone who carries a visible mileage of actual living. But Sam Elliott fundamentally defied the mathematics of Hollywood. He did not sprint to the top of the mountain. He was a glacier, slowly, immovably carving his own valley through 20 years of solid, unforgiving rock. As the calendar turned to the late 1980s, the cultural aesthetic of American cinema was incredibly loud, fast, and synthetic. It was an era dominated by neon lights, explosive action sequences, and leading men who seemed perfectly manicured even while dodging bullets. The audience was being fed a diet of pure cinematic sugar. But deep within the collective subconscious of the American public, a quiet, aching hunger was beginning to form. People were growing exhausted by the plastic illusions. They were starving for gravity. They were starving for a man who did not need to shout to command a room, a man who possessed the quiet, incredibly dangerous stillness of the old frontier. The world was finally, desperately hungry for exactly what Sam Elliott had been holding onto for 2 decades. In 1989, at the age of 45, an age when most unrecognized actors have long since surrendered their dreams and returned to civilian life, Sam Elliott stepped onto the set of a rowdy, unapologetic action film called Roadhouse. He was cast to play Wade Garrett, a legendary, aging bouncer who serves as a mentor to the film's young, hyperkinetic star, Patrick Swayze. The film was not designed to win Academy Awards. It was a loud, violent, purely entertaining popcorn movie. But the moment Sam Elliott appeared on screen, the entire molecular structure of the film fundamentally changed. He was 45 years old. The thick, iconic mustache was fully established. His hair was long and wild, completely untamed by studio stylists. And then he spoke. He delivered his lines with a slow, raspy, baritone drawl that sounded like heavy boots walking across a wooden floorboard. He did not possess the frantic, anxious energy of an actor trying to get noticed. He possessed the absolute, terrifying authority of a man who has already survived everything the young hero is currently worrying about. When Roadhouse hit the theaters, the reaction was not just a success. It was a cultural awakening. Audiences sat up in their seats and collectively asked a question that should have been asked 20 years prior. Who is that man? Women were absolutely mesmerized by his grounded, unapologetic masculinity. Men watched him and realized they were looking at the ultimate blueprint of what a man is supposed to be. Suddenly, the deep voice and the old-school demeanor that the studio executives had mocked and rejected in the 1960s were the most highly sought-after commodities in the entertainment industry. He had not changed his voice. He had not shaved his mustache. He had not taken addiction lessons. He had stood perfectly still, weathering 20 years of brutal storms until the entire cinematic universe finally revolved back around to him. Reflecting on his deep, unwavering connection to the specific kind of characters he portrays, Sam later delivered a quote that beautifully summarizes his entire artistic and personal philosophy. I think there's a lot of truth in Westerns. I think it has something to do with integrity and a man's word and honor and all that kind of stuff. I've always believed in that. I've always believed in being a man of your word and doing what you say you're going to do. If you have that, you don't need a whole lot else. Integrity, a man's word, and honor. Listen to the breathtaking, almost extinct simplicity of those values. For the older audiences watching this, especially those who grew up in an era where a handshake was a binding contract and where silent endurance was valued far more than loud complaints, Sam Elliott was not just an actor playing a cowboy. He was a living, breathing preservation of a forgotten American code. With the door to superstardom finally violently kicked open, Sam did not hesitate. He walked through the frame and cemented his immortality in 1993, when he was 49 years old, in the legendary Western masterpiece, Tombstone. Tombstone was a cinematic powerhouse, featuring Val Kilmer delivering the performance of a lifetime as the flamboyant, dying Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell as a legendary lawman Wyatt Earp. But the absolute spine of the movie, the quiet, immovable pillar that held the entire chaotic, violent narrative together, was Sam Elliott playing Virgil Earp. Look closely at Sam's performance in that film. Look at his face when the Earp brothers are walking shoulder to shoulder down the dusty, wind-swept streets of Tombstone, heading toward the blazing gunfire, the OK Corral. He does not project fearless invincibility. He projects duty. He portrays a man who knows, with terrifying certainty, that he might die in the next 60 seconds, but he continues to walk forward anyway, because it is the right thing to do. Where does an actor find that level of profound, silent gravity? How does a man project such agonizing, authentic weight? He finds it in the wilderness. Sam Elliott could never, ever have played Virgil Earp when he was 25 years old. If the studio executives had handed him the world in 1966, he would have been a superficial, unseasoned actor playing dress-up. To play a man who carries away the world, you must first be crushed by it. Sam poured every single ounce of his actual, lived agony into that role. He poured the sudden, catastrophic death of his father into the silence. He poured the 20 years of humiliating rejections, the odd jobs, and the lonely nights in Los Angeles into that famous, hardened stare. He took all the pain that the universe had inflicted upon him, and he alchemized it into pure, cinematic gold. Tombstone became an absolute phenomenon. It elevated Sam Elliott from a popular character actor into an untouchable, living deity of the Western genre. By the time he crossed into his 50s, he was universally recognized as the ultimate patriarch of American cinema. Directors no longer asked him to audition. They simply wrote roles specifically for his voice. He had secured his fortune. He had secured his legacy. But more importantly, he had secured his ultimate vindication in the quiet, private moments of his massive success. Sitting on the balcony of his Malibu home with Katharine by his side, Sam must have surely thought about the freezing, rainy days in Oregon. He must have thought about his father, Henry, the strict, practical man who died believing his son was chasing a foolish, impossible dream. Henry Elliott had told his boy that he didn't have a snowball's chance in hell. But 30 years later, the son had not only survived hell, he had completely conquered it. The invisible boy was now seen by the entire planet. He had won the war. The grueling 20-year climb was officially over, and the legend of Sam Elliott was permanently set in stone. But the universe of storytelling is never truly finished with a legend. As Sam transitioned into his 60s and eventually his 70s, he assumed he would simply ride out his twilight years playing comfortable, familiar variations of the wise old cowboy. He assumed the heavy lifting was behind him. He was entirely spectacularly wrong. As the 21st century accelerated into a frenetic, deeply polarized, and technologically obsessed era, the 70-something-year-old cowboy was about to be thrust into the most challenging, unexpected, and completely unprecedented chapter of his entire life. The industry was about to hand him the greatest acting challenge of his career, resulting in a shocking Academy Award nomination at the age of 74. But simultaneously, the modern world, a world governed by internet outrage and rapid-fire public executions, was quietly laying a trap. The man who had spent a lifetime speaking his mind with absolute, unfiltered honesty was about to walk directly into a devastating cultural storm that would test the very foundation of his character. The late Coronation and the storm of the modern world. There is a profound, almost unimaginable beauty in achieving your greatest validation when the vast majority of the world assumes your story has already been completely written. In Hollywood, the seventh decade of man's life is traditionally a time of gentle fading. It is an era of lifetime achievement awards, polite applause, and a quiet retreat from the grueling, high-stakes battlefield of leading roles. But Sam Elliott has never operated on a traditional timeline. The man who had spent 20 years entirely invisible in the 1960s and 1970s was about to experience the absolute, breathtaking zenith of his cinematic career at the age of 74. In 2018, Bradley Cooper, embarking on his highly ambitious directorial debut, A Star is Born, knew exactly who he needed to anchor the immense, tragic, emotional weight of the film. He did not just want Sam Elliott to act in the movie. He actually modeled his own character's voice entirely after Sam's legendary, gravelly baritone. Cooper cast Sam as Bobby Maine, the older, fiercely protective, yet deeply exhausted brother of a self-destructing rock star. To watch Sam Elliott in A Star is Born is to witness an absolute masterclass in silent, agonizing heartbreak. He was not playing a cowboy with a six-shooter. He was playing a man helplessly watching his own flesh and blood drown in the dark waters of addiction. In one of the most devastating, unforgettable scenes of the entire decade, Sam's character backs his truck out of a driveway after a final, poignant conversation with his brother. He does not speak a single word. He simply looks straight ahead, and his eyes fill with a lifetime of unshed tears. The heavy, monumental grief of a man who knows he cannot save his brother is written into every single wrinkle on his face. The industry, the very same industry that had once told a 21-year-old Sam Elliott that he didn't have a snowball's chance in hell, was absolutely paralyzed by the performance. In early 2019, at 74 years old, Sam Elliott received his very first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Imagine the profound, staggering, emotional poetry of that specific moment. The ghost of his strict, practical father, Henry Elliott, who had died in 1966 believing his son was wasting his life, had finally, permanently been laid to rest. Sam had climbed the absolute highest, most prestigious mountain in the history of global cinema. He walked the red carpet with Katharine, his wife of 35 years, by his side, his magnificent white hair shining under the flashbulbs. He had won the long game. The coronation was complete. He was universally beloved, untouchable, and firmly cemented as a grandfather of American cinema. But there is a terrifying, highly unpredictable volatility to the modern world. We currently live in an incredibly hypersensitive, unforgiving digital era. It is a landscape dominated by rapid-fire internet outrage, where a single misspoken sentence can instantly ignite a global firestorm designed to completely incinerate a lifetime of goodwill. And in 2022, the 77-year-old Cowboy, a man who had spent 50 years speaking his mind with unfiltered, old-school honesty, walked directly into the teeth of a catastrophic cultural hurricane. It happened on Marc Maron's WTF podcast. The conversation turned to the critically acclaimed film The Power of the Dog, directed by Jane Campion, which was heavily favored to sweep the Oscars that year. The film was a slow-burning, psychological deconstruction of the American West, dealing heavily with themes of repressed sexuality and toxic masculinity. When asked about the film, Sam did not use the slick, heavily sanitized, focus group public relations language that modern celebrities use to protect themselves. He answered like an 80-year-old man from a different century. He called the film a piece of crap. He bluntly, angrily criticized the portrayal of the American cowboy, comparing the characters to Chippendale's dancers. He questioned Jane Campion's understanding of the American West, and he made unfiltered, incredibly harsh comments regarding the film's LGBTQ themes and its deconstruction of the mythology he had spent his entire life representing. The internet reaction was instantaneous, merciless, and absolutely deafening. Within minutes, the podcast audio went viral. The modern media machine, which had just spent the last 3 years worshiping him as a national treasure, violently turned on him. Headlines across the globe condemned his remarks. He was accused of homophobia, xenophobia, and being a bitter, outdated relic of a toxic past. The ferocious, unrelenting engine of cancel culture locked its crosshairs directly onto the chest of Sam Elliott. For the older audiences watching this unfold, for the millions of men and women who have watched the world change at a dizzying, incomprehensible speed and who constantly feel a quiet, terrifying anxiety about saying the wrong thing in today's hypersensitive society, this was a profoundly uncomfortable, incredibly tense moment. How does a man born in 1944 survive a digital mob in 2022? In modern Hollywood, there is a very strict, incredibly cowardly playbook for surviving a cancellation. You hire a crisis management firm. You issue a sterile, legally approved apology written by a publicist on your social media account. You claim your words were taken out of context. You disappear for 6 months, and you wait for the internet to find someone else to destroy. But Sam Elliott is not a coward. He is not a manufactured brand. He is a man. A month after the fierce backlash had threatened to permanently stain his legacy, Sam attended a television panel for Deadline contenders. He knew the world was watching. He knew the media was waiting for him to either double down on his anger or deliver a fake corporate apology. Instead, Sam Elliott did something that completely shattered the modern internet playbook. He took absolute, total, and agonizing accountability for his own flaws. He sat on the stage, his voice thick with genuine emotion, and he looked directly out at the crowd. He didn't read from a piece of paper. He didn't blame the podcast host. He completely stripped away his own pride. First, don't go do a podcast whose call letters are WTF, he began with a brief, self-deprecating smile, before the gravity of the moment settled entirely over his face. I told the podcaster that I thought Jane Campion was a brilliant director, and I want to apologize to the cast of The Power of the Dog, brilliant actors all, and in particular, Benedict Cumberbatch. I can only say that I'm sorry, and I am. He paused, visibly fighting the heavy, agonizing weight of genuine regret in his chest. And then he delivered the absolute defining statement of old-school, honorable masculinity. I wasn't very articulate about it. I didn't articulate it very well. And I said some things that hurt people. And I feel terrible about that. The gay community has been incredible to me my entire career. I'm sorry I hurt any of those friends and someone that I loved, and anyone else by the words that I used. I said some things that hurt people, and I feel terrible about that. Listen to the breathtaking, raw humility of those words. There were no excuses. There was no, I'm sorry if you were offended. There was only a 77-year-old man standing in front of the entire world, looking at the mess he had made and saying, "I was wrong. I caused pain, and I carry the burden of that failure." For a culture so desperately starved for genuine accountability, this apology was an absolute revelation. Sam proved that true strength is not about never making a mistake. True strength, the kind of strength that is forged over decades of living, losing, and learning, is the ability to swallow your massive ego, admit your ignorance, and ask for forgiveness from the people you have wounded. The firestorm immediately died down. The digital mob dispersed, entirely disarmed by the profound, undeniable sincerity of an old man's contrition. The world realized that they did not want Sam Elliott to be a perfect, flawless robot. They simply wanted him to be exactly what he had always been, a real, incredibly flawed, but fundamentally decent human being. He had survived the most dangerous, unpredictable storm of his entire career. He had stared into the terrifying abyss of modern cancellation and walked out the other side with his soul and his dignity completely intact. But the universe, having tested his emotional fortitude in the fires of public opinion, was quietly preparing to test his physical endurance one last time. Just as the dust settled on the controversy, the phone rang. It was the brilliant, uncompromising creator of Yellowstone, Taylor Sheridan. He was offering the 77-year-old actor the leading role in a gritty, brutal, and physically exhausting prequel series called 1883. Sam Elliott was about to step back onto the horse. He was about to embark on the most grueling, freezing, and agonizingly difficult cinematic journey of his entire life. Completely unaware that this final ride would demand he pour every single drop of grief he had ever accumulated into a performance that would absolutely shatter the heart of America. The Ghost of the Trail, the Crucible of 1883, and the ultimate alchemy. There is a comforting, deeply ingrained assumption in American society regarding the autumn of our lives. We believe that when a man successfully navigates the turbulent, exhausting waters of his career and safely reaches his mid-70s, he has finally earned the absolute right to put down his sword. We expect the aging warrior to retreat to a comfortable armchair, watch the sun set over the ocean, and allow a younger generation to carry the heavy burdens of the world. By the summer of 2021, Sam Elliott was 77 years old. He had absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone. He had secured his Academy Award nomination. He had navigated the treacherous, unpredictable storms of modern internet culture and emerged with his dignity completely intact. He had his beautiful wife, Katharine, his daughter, Cleo, and his peaceful sanctuary in Malibu. The final, quiet chapter of his life seemed perfectly, immutably written. But destiny, operating through the brilliant, uncompromising vision of writer and director Taylor Sheridan, was preparing to hand the 77-year-old Cowboy a script that would demand the absolute, grueling extraction of every single ounce of his physical and emotional marrow. The project was 1883, a staggering, brutally realistic television epic detailing the agonizing, deadly journey of immigrants traveling in covered wagons across the unforgiving American Great Plains. Taylor Sheridan offered Sam the leading role of Captain Shea Brennan. Shea Brennan was a hardened, brilliant Civil War veteran tasked with guiding the wagon train across a hostile continent. But beneath the tough, uncompromising exterior of a leader, Shea was a man entirely hollowed out by an incomprehensible tragedy. As the story opens, he has just lost his beloved wife and his young daughter to a merciless, sweeping illness. He is a man walking on the absolute razor's edge of the abyss, desperately, quietly searching for a single reason to keep breathing in a world that has violently stripped him of everything he ever loved. When Sam Elliott sat in his quiet home and read the scripts for the first time, the tough, immovable granite of his legendary persona completely shattered. He was not just reading words on a page. He was reading a map of his own soul. He recognized the heavy, suffocating weight of outliving the people you desperately need. He understood the agonizing silence of a man who has lost his compass. Reflecting on the profound, completely overwhelming emotional gravity of the material, Sam later stripped away every ounce of Hollywood toughness in a deeply vulnerable interview, admitting, "I know at this point in my life, there's not going to be a better part. I shed tears reading these scripts. I really did, and I'm not a crier. But there was something so incredibly profound and honest about this man's journey. I thought, I have been preparing for this guy my entire life. Listen to the breathtaking, terrifying magnitude of that realization. At 77 years old, realizing that the ultimate masterpiece of your entire existence is not behind you, but standing directly in front of you. But preparing for the role emotionally was entirely different from surviving it physically. Modern Hollywood is an industry built on the absolute prioritization of comfort. Actors shoot sprawling historical epics inside massive climate-controlled warehouses surrounded by green screens, sipping expensive lattes while computers generate the dirt, the wind, and the snow. 1883 was not shot on a green screen. In the late summer and fall of 2021, the production moved from the suffocating 100-degree, blistering heat of Fort Worth, Texas, directly into the freezing, sub-zero, bone-chilling winds of Montana. The cast and crew were plunged into an absolute physical crucible. Imagine the sheer, terrifying physical reality for a man approaching 80 years old. Sam Elliott was not sitting in a comfortable trailer. He was in the saddle, riding a horse for 10 to 12 hours a day. He was breathing in thick, choking dust. He was enduring the freezing rain, the blistering sun, and the brutal, unforgiving exhaustion of the open prairie. For the audiences watching at home, especially those who intimately understand the daily aches, the joint pain, and the physical limitations that accompany old age, the sheer, unadulterated grit required for Sam to simply wake up every morning, put on his boots, and climb back onto that horse is an act of almost incomprehensible heroism. It wasn't acting. It was pure, unvarnished survival. But it was within this brutal, freezing physical crucible that the greatest, most devastating magic of Sam Elliott's entire career was finally forged. When you watch 1883, and you look into the eyes of Captain Shea Brennan as he stares out across the desolate plains, you are witnessing an absolute masterclass in the alchemy of human grief. There is a specific, iconic scene where Shea sits completely alone in the grass, holding a pistol, sobbing quietly as he remembers his dead wife and daughter. When Sam Elliott cries on that screen, those are not the manufactured tears of a Hollywood actor trying to win an award. Those are the tears of a man who has lived. When Shea weeps for his family, Sam is weeping for Henry Elliott, the strict, practical father who died of a sudden heart attack in 1966, before he could ever see his son become a legend. When Shea stares into the vast, indifferent horizon, Sam is staring back at the 20 years of agonizing, invisible rejections he endured in the 1970s. He is weeping for the friends he has outlived. He is channeling every single ounce of disappointment, loss, and profound sorrow he had quietly collected over 7 decades, and he is pouring entirely, fearlessly into the vessel of this character. He took all the quiet, unspoken pain of his entire generation, and he gave it a voice. The response from the American public was not just enthusiastic. It was a deeply emotional, religious reverence. Millions of viewers, particularly the older generation who felt entirely forgotten by modern, synthetic entertainment, tuned in every week and wept alongside him. They saw a man who looked like their fathers and grandfathers, portraying a kind of honorable, sacrificial, and deeply broken masculinity that simply does not exist on television anymore. The epic journey of Shea Brennan ends in one of the most poetic, heartbreakingly beautiful sequences ever filmed. Having successfully guided the surviving immigrants to the promised land of Oregon, fulfilling his final solemn duty, the old captain rides his horse alone to the very edge of the continent. He sits on the beach, looking out at the vast, infinite expanse of the Pacific Ocean. A hummingbird, the very symbol of his deceased wife's spirit, hovers gently in front of his face. He smiles a soft, genuinely peaceful smile, and he finally, quietly allows his exhausted soul to let go. It was a perfect, immaculate conclusion to a masterpiece. The industry, absolutely staggered by the sheer physical endurance and profound, crushing emotional depth of the performance, could no longer deny his absolute supremacy. In early 2023, at the age of 78, Sam Elliott walked onto the stage to accept the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a male actor in a miniseries. He held the heavy bronze statue in his massive, weathered hands. He looked out at the glittering crowd of his peers, and he delivered a speech stripped of all vanity, thanking his wife Katharine and acknowledging the brutal, beautiful reality of the journey. He had done it. He had taken the most exhausting, terrifying gamble of his entire life, pushed his aging body to the absolute limits of human frailty, and had delivered a piece of art that will be studied, revered, and wept over for generations to come. But as the heavy, dusty boots of Captain Shea Brennan were permanently retired to the wardrobe department, and the cameras of 1883 stopped rolling, the real Sam Elliott found himself standing at the threshold of a completely new, uncharted territory. He was returning home to Malibu. He was returning to the quiet, predictable rhythm of a life away from the cameras. But the calendar was mercilessly pushing him toward a milestone that no amount of grit, no amount of fame, and no amount of golden statues can ever negotiate with. The boy from Oregon was about to cross into his 80s. The ultimate, final chapter was beginning, and as the modern world outside his window continued to spin faster and faster into chaos, the last true cowboy was preparing to show the universe exactly how a legend grows old with absolute, unbreakable grace. The Ocean Sanctuary, the ghost at rest, and the last true cowboy. There is a specific, profound silence that only belongs to the ocean. It is a timeless, rhythmic breathing of the earth, entirely indifferent to the frantic, artificial noise of the modern world. It does not care about box office receipts. It does not care about internet controversies. And it certainly does not care about the fleeting, superficial applause of Hollywood. For Sam Elliott, the crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean outside his home in Malibu, California, represent the ultimate hard-won sanctuary. Today, in the year 2026, Sam Elliott is 81 years old. To look at him now is to look at a magnificent living monument. The physical realities of 8 decades on this earth are beautifully, undeniably written into the geography of his face. The iconic, unruly mustache is completely white. The thick hair that he stubbornly refused to cut for the studio executives in the 1960s is now a crown of distinguished silver. And that legendary, gravelly voice, the voice that narrated the American West for half a century, has deepened even further, vibrating with the immense, heavy wisdom of a man who has absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone. In a culture that is utterly obsessed with chasing the illusion of eternal youth, Sam Elliott wears his 81 years like a badge of absolute honor. He does not hide from time. He stands firmly in it. When the grueling, freezing, and physically terrifying production of 1883 finally wrapped, Sam returned to the quiet gates of his Malibu estate. He hung up the heavy canvas coat of Captain Shea Brennan. He left the blinding spotlights, the grueling schedules, and the red carpets behind. He walked through his front door, and he returned to the only role that has ever truly, fundamentally mattered to him. He returned to being a husband and a father. In an industry where marriages are frequently dissolved with the speed of a changing season, the union between Sam Elliott and Katharine Ross stands as a breathtaking, almost incomprehensible miracle. In 2026, they are celebrating 42 years of official marriage and nearly half a century of unbroken, fiercely loyal partnership since they first looked at each other on that movie set in 1978. Katharine is now 86 years old. They sit together on their porch, watching the California sun dip below the horizon. They do not have publicists orchestrating their public appearances. They do not sell their private moments to magazines. They simply exist exactly as they always have. Two old souls who recognize the quiet, immovable truth in one another and made a deliberate, daily choice to never let go. She is the love of my life, Sam has said repeatedly across the decades, never changing the simple, unadorned truth of that sentence. For the older audiences watching this, for the men and women who know exactly how much patience, forgiveness, and absolute grit it takes to keep a marriage intact through the brutal, unpredictable storms of life, Sam and Katharine are the ultimate triumph. They prove that true love is not about the grand, cinematic gestures. True love is about waking up, making the coffee, and choosing the same person, over and over again, long after the cameras have stopped rolling. But there's an even deeper, profoundly poetic resolution occurring in the quiet twilight of Sam Elliott's life. It is a resolution that takes us all the way back to the very first chapter of our story. It takes us back to the freezing, devastating morning in March of 1966. Remember the 21-year-old boy who answered the telephone, only to learn that his father, Henry Elliott, had suffered a massive, fatal heart attack. Remember the agonizing, bleeding psychological wound that boy carried, knowing his father died, completely convinced that his son was a failure, a boy who didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of surviving in Hollywood. For 60 years, Sam Elliott carried the ghost of Henry Elliott in his chest. He used the pain of that disapproval as rocket fuel. He endured 20 years of humiliating rejections. He refused to change his voice, and he fought his way to the absolute summit of American cinema, all while secretly hoping that the ghost was watching. But a profound, heartbreaking mathematical reality occurs when you live a long life. Sam Elliott is now 81. He has outlived the father he lost by nearly 3 decades. The frightened boy from Oregon is now a grand patriarch, vastly older, and infinitely more seasoned than the strict, practical man who broke his heart in 1966. If we could somehow breach the veil of time, if the ghost of Henry Elliott could somehow materialize on that sun-drenched balcony in Malibu today, what would he see? He would not see a Hollywood phony. He would not see a man who sold his soul for a cheap paycheck. He would see a man who built a sprawling, multi-million-dollar empire based entirely on the very values Henry tried to instill in him: integrity, hard work, a refusal to complain, and the absolute sanctity of a man's given word. He would see a man who remained fiercely loyal to one woman for his entire adult life. He would see a devoted father to a beautiful daughter. If Henry Elliott could see the 81-year-old titan his son has become, the strict, practical man of the Great Depression would undoubtedly take off his hat. He would look at the staggering, undeniable legacy of Sam Elliott, and he would take back the words that caused so much pain. He would finally, unequivocally say, "I was wrong. You did it. I am proud of you." The war is finally over. The 20-year wilderness is a distant memory. The ghost of his father can finally, permanently rest in peace. As the modern world continues to spin faster and faster, descending into a frantic, noisy, and deeply cynical algorithm of disposable content, Sam Elliott remains one of the last, immovable anchors of a forgotten era. He is the last true cowboy. He didn't bend to the world. He simply stood perfectly still, weathering the storms, the rejections, and the tragedies, until the world eventually realized it was starving for his authenticity and bent entirely to him. The boy who was completely invisible became the man nobody could take their eyes off. The actor who was told he spoke too slowly became the most trusted, iconic voice in America. And the son who was told he had no chance built a legacy that will absolutely outlast us all. The mustache is silver, the boots are dusty, but the soul of the cowboy remains entirely, magnificently unconquered. As the screen fades to black on the incredibly stubborn, deeply inspiring, and beautifully triumphant journey of Sam Elliott, the camera turns away from the Hollywood legend, and it focuses gently, deeply on you. Sam's story is a profound, magnificent reminder that the greatest things in life, whether it's a legendary career, an unbreakable marriage, or the healing of a lifelong wound, are never built overnight. They are built through absolute, quiet endurance. He showed us that patience is not a weakness. It is the ultimate weapon of the survivor. What about you? As you look back on the long, winding trail of your own life, what were the dreams you refused to let go of, even when the world told you it was impossible? Have you, like Sam and Katharine, managed to hold on to a love that survived the testing fires of time? And for those of you who lost a parent before they could see the person you became, how do you honor their memory in your life today? Please, do not let your hard-earned wisdom go unspoken. Share your stories of endurance, your 40-year romances, and your quiet victories in the comments below. This community is a gathering place for survivors, and there are people reading these comments right now who are struggling in their own wilderness years. Your story of holding the line might be the exact encouragement they need to keep fighting today. If Sam Elliott's legendary journey moved you, if it reminded you of the absolute, breathtaking beauty of staying true to yourself in a world that constantly demands you change, please leave a like on this video. Share it with someone who appreciates the old-school, unapologetic spirit of a true American original. And subscribe to our channel, because we are committed to telling the deep, unfiltered, and profoundly human stories behind the legends we thought we knew. Thank you, deeply and truly, for spending your time with us today. Remember to stand your ground. Cherish the people who love you for exactly who you are. And until next time, keep riding forward.